Yom Gimel Parshas Bahar B'Chukoisai Tafshin Lamed Hey. It's a Lag BaOmer Maimer. The Rebbe begins L'havin in Halul the Reb Shimon ben Yochai to understand the idea of the yard site, the day of celebration of Reb Shimon ben Yochai. Befrat al Pi Hamavur B'Geras HaKodesh Siman Zach, especially according to what's explained in the Geras HaKodesh of Tanya of the Alter Rebbe, chapter 27. Zach is just flipping it around. And also the explanation of Siman Chav Zayin in Siman Chav Ches of Igeres HaTshuva. Shabiyom Haistalchus, in the day of a passing of a tzaddik, Oila Kol Pulos, all the effects and all the actions that the tzaddik did goes up higher and higher. Like it's explained at length in the Siddur, in the Mamorim of Lag BaOmer, meaning the Siddur Imdach, the Middle Rebbe's collection of the Alter Rebbe's Mamorim. Sha'oz, at the time of the yard site, Oilan Neshama Ad Lashor Shem Koidachi Al Yoin, the Neshama goes up to its most highest root and source. The Chalzeh, all of this, Ba'oifen Shein Yonim Elu, that these matters, Aliyas Nishmasoi Upulas Avedasoi, that both the ascent of his neshama and also the influence, the effect of his avoida, nimshachim begilu lamata. This all comes down in a revealed state down here below. It influences and impacts us down here below. It's not his own private thing that he's going through and that his Torah mitzvahs is going through. But if in the Polish is Bekerev Oretz in such a manner that he's affecting salvations within the earth itself. In other words, he brings Yeshuas, he brings help for all people down here, for the world in general. So that is what the Alter Rebbe says in general about the passing of a tzaddik. So the Rebbe applies this now concerning the Reb Shimon ben Yochai. Moving for this is understood. Inyan Hailullah, the Reb Shimon ben Yochai, the day of the yard site of Reb Shimon ben Yochai, Kashur imalosoi hamyuchedes shel Reb Shimon ben Yochai, is connected with the specific quality that's unique to Reb Shimon ben Yochai, because it's his neshama's aliyah, it's his Torah and avoda's aliyah. So whatever his Torah and avodah were about, whatever his neshama is about, that is what is both being oila lamaila and also going to impact the world down here below. And the Rebbe continues, line 12, additional to this, though since in the day of the yard site, it's also emphasized the revelation that takes place down here below in our world. Like we said before, it's not just about neshama going up. It's not just about the Torah and avodah of the tzaddik going up, but it's also about what all of that now impacts down here below. It's also connected with his service and his activities when it comes to action. In addition to his advantage in Torah study. In other words, Reb Shimon ben Yochai was a well-known Torah scholar, and he was Terasim Nasi, and he made and he paskin different halachas, etc., etc., and he authored the Sefer HaZoyer. But since it's about the impact that his neshama has down here below and the impact of his avodah down here below, so of all the things of the Rashbi that we're going to talk about, it should be like first and foremost, or at least connected with actionable things, because the point is about how it affects in the physical world. Ois Beis, line 16. By prefacing that the general life of a person, of a yid, is divided into Torah study and action. Chazal, Talmud Maisa, like the Chazal speak about, there's Torah study, there's action, and they discuss which is primary, which is more important, which is the greater necessity, etc., etc. Why do we categorize them by this way? Because that's the entire purpose. The person was born to toil. Therefore, action must be there. That is a core part of Amal. V'ad lamaisa shemalashon ma'asin al tzedakah. We're not just talking about any action, but action to the degree, the way the Chazal used the term, that one can coerce ma'asin related to Maisa concerning tzedakah, shu'in shel kfiyah v'hechrich. It's an idea of coercion and forcing. So now it's understood when there's an issue of forcing and coercion, so then it's in a way of toil when a person needs to really force themselves to do it. And that is primarily in the world of action. Action is from the word ma'as na'atzedakah, where there's coercion involved. Elosh be'inyan ha'amal de kedusha gufa, and the idea of the toil of kedusha itself. Yeshloisha fanim, there are three types of toil. Upaloshna Gemara, like the language and the expression of the Gemara about this. Amal malacha, there's one type of toil, the toil of work, the toil of labor. What work is it referring to? So the Rebbe says in the parentheses, the koyal maleches habirudim, it's referring to the work of refining the sparks, just like physically. When you are working in certain industries, in preparing gold and silver, etc., precious metals, even precious stones, you're dealing with refining, you're dealing with elevating and extracting the good from the bad, you're dealing with birudim. So the same thing spiritually, when we're talking about the toil of work, labor, malacha, we're referring to the malacha of the avodas habirudim, which is done primarily through the avodah of Torah, the avodah of mitzvahs, when a person fulfills mitzvahs, and also when he does the avodah l'shem shemayim, so then he's taking physical things and he's being mevared them, he's elevating the sparks from them. Top of page Vav, amal sicha, there's a second type of toil, the toil of speech, talking, which is talking about avodas hatfilah, the avodah, the service of davening. Chazal say, ein sicha ela tfilah, that when we say the word sicha, it means and it refers to davening. Like it says, Vayetzi Yitzchak l'suach basada, when before Rivka was brought to him, it says Yitzchak went out l'suach basada. The Chazal say, what was this l'suach basada? This l'suach is from the word tefillah, sicha from the word tefillah. He went out to speak with Hashem. So that's the second type of toil, amal sicha. And amal Torah, and that speaks for itself, the toil of Torah. It's like this, these three ideas are explained at length in many places. Amal malacha, amal sicha, amal Torah. We just made a lots in a maimer of my father-in-law of the Frierdiker Rebbe, that he talks about these three toils. The Chol Shlosh and Yonim Elu, and all these three aspects, all these three amal, all these three toils, Tzrichim Liyas, Ba'avodas Kol Echad Misrael, has to be in the avodah of every single Yid. Behind this means Shenoisef Al Amal Torah, in addition to the toil of Torah, Tzarich Liyas Etzli Gam Amal Malach, and there needs to be by him also the toil of work. Maimer Azal is understood from what the Chazal say, Kol Torah She'enim Malacha Chulo, any Torah that does not have work with it, and says that's not a good thing. It's not the appropriate way how you're supposed to be studying Torah, to be devoted solely to Torah study without accompanying it by work. Based on what we explained, that work over here is referring to the avodas habirudim, it's understood. Since Torah study has to be in such a way, not just to study for study's sake, but to study and to teach and to observe and to do. To study for the sake of fulfilling and doing the mitzvahs. And the mitzvahs is that's the idea of the toil of work. So we see how every single Yid cannot just satisfy himself and say, well, I have Amal Torah, I have the toil of Torah, I don't need anything else. So he says, no, obviously, Kol Torah She'enim Imam Malacha, Soifa B'Teila, the Chazal say, the Rebbe left out the negative, didn't want to bring down the negative expression. But you have that idea that it needs to have Malacha as well. What about the other amal that we mentioned? Not tefillah. Also, there has to be the idea of davening that he mentioned before. Amal sicham, like we find even concerning Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, Torah was his profession, and therefore, because Torah was his profession, he was released of the obligation to daven the way we have the obligation to daven daily, but instead he didn't forego davening entirely, but he davened annually. So we see that even someone of Rashbi's level of Amal Torah, even he had Amal Sicha, except to what degree that's a difference between someone of Rashbi's stature and a regular person. Especially in the Maimer, by that title from the Mizritcher Magid. That it says over there, actually, someone that studies that his Torah is in such an intense way that it's that the Torah is his profession, he needs davening even more so. He needs a tefillah miyuchedes, he needs a unique form of davening. Because his Torah study is of such a deep variety, that by him, since he does such a deep level of Torah study, davening matters even more than by others. In other words, don't assume and don't derive from the fact that since Rashbi davened only once a year, that means that some way his davening was less than or less necessary than the davening of someone that has to daven 3 times a day. The Rebbe brings from the Torah, the Mizritcher Magid, no. That Adrab, his davening had to be in concert with his learning, because we said you need to have all 3 amals. And his amal Torah was reflected also in his amal sicha. His davening had to be something that connected and was corresponded to the quality of his Torah learning. Concerning also, like we find concerning Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe Rabbeinu's entire being is also Torah. Like it says in Malachi, Zichru Torahs Moshe Avdi, remember the Torah of Moshe, my servant. Why is it called the Torah of Moshe? Seemingly it's the Torah of Hashem, and in other places it's actually referred to and it's called Torah of Hashem. Why is it called Torah of Moshe? So the Chazal say, Lefi Shemasar Nafshe Allah, because he totally devoted his life for it. He gave up his life for it. Lefichach Nikras Al Shmoi. Therefore the Torah is called by the name of Moshe Rabbeinu. So despite the fact that his entire being was Torah, so one might think that, okay, he doesn't need Amal Sicha so much. He doesn't need a level of davening. So we say, he also has the idea of davening, to the degree that there is a special davening named for him. There's something called Tefillah LeMoshe. Haven't told him there's a davening of Moshe Rabbeinu. But the Rebbe right away qualifies this. Still in all, the davening of Moshe Rabbeinu is in some ways different than our davening. Al Shatfilah the Moshe Rabbeinu Eloi Tfilas Ani Al Tfilas Asher. The davening of Moshe Rabbeinu is not the tefillah of a poor person, but the tefillah of a rich person. Meaning, the tefillah of a poor person is that the poor person is asking for their own needs. And it could be whatever they're poor in. It doesn't have to be monetarily poor. If they're poor in anything, they're lacking in anything, that's called a tefillah la'ani, because they're davening for their needs, whatever they're lacking. If they're lacking health, if they're lacking some other things, or if they're lacking money, they're davening that Hashem should fulfill their needs. Moshe Rabbeinu, on the other hand, he did not daven a tefillah la'ani. He did not daven the davening of someone that's poor. He davened a davening of a rich person. The Chazal explain what is the davening of a rich person, that instead of Moshe Rabbeinu davening for himself, he was davening that Hashem's needs should be fulfilled. He was davening for Hashem's benefit, for Hashem's honor. There's a whole example that Moshe Rabbeinu was like a certain officer that came to a king and said that there's a certain country that's destroyed and I want to build it up for you, etc., etc. Same thing, Moshe Rabbeinu was not davening for himself, he was davening for Klal Yisrael, he was davening for the Eibishter. Move on, top of page Zayin, from this is understood. Inyan Dvar Malchus, Inyan Atfilo Tzarech Liyas Gamik, Mishtarosim Nosoi. The idea of a Malchus, the idea of davening has to be even by someone that Torah is their profession, until the ultimate level of davening that's possible to be, or the ultimate level of Terosim Nosoi that could be. When it comes to Torah, his profession, there's many levels. Like it's explained in Torah concerning Rabbi Yehuda, he was a very great individual. This is not a human being. He was not born to humans. That doesn't mean literally, but it means figuratively speaking that he was so great, he was beyond humanity. And v'gam etzloi haya inyan terasim nasei. He also had a level of terasim nasei. His Torah was also in a state of bittul, where he's only in a way that he is a mouthpiece for Hashem. That Hashem says, I will place my words in your mouth, that he was an example of this, where he was completely bottled to the word of Hashem that came out of his mouth. Chazal say, Masnissen Malchus, that the Mishnah is the king. So in other words, it's not the person saying the Mishnah, it's the Mishnah, which is Hashem ordering and speaking and commanding through the Tana that's saying the Mishnah. Similarly, the Chazal said, Man Malkei Rabbanon, who are considered kings, that's the Chachamim. Why are they considered kings? Because they're only mouthpieces for Hashem. Hashem's words is coming out through their mouth. It's a level of a king that he commands and decrees that the rule and the law should be such and such. So we're continuing as Bat Rabbi Yehuda v'hainu shahoya etzloi ha'inin the Shechina. That Rabbi Yehuda had a state of Shechina speaking out of his throat. Lefi madrigosa, he seems to be quoting the Lashon Alter Rebbe and Torah according to his level. In other words, there are different levels that this is used. The Shechina medaberes groinoi. Moshe Rabbeinu was the epitome of that, but I guess the Alter Rebbe is qualifying and saying that even Rabbi Yehuda had Shechina medaberes groinoi, but according to Rabbi Yehuda's level. Therefore he goes on, so despite how high and how lofty the learning and Terosim Nosim was of Rabbi Yehuda, based on all the different things that we explained now about Rabbi Yehuda, still in all, it doesn't come to the quality and the level of Reb Shimon Yochai. Therefore there's also a difference concerning their davening. Rabbi Yehuda used to daven monthly. Once a month he used to daven. Every 30 days, it says, after he reviewed his entire learning, at the conclusion of that review, or before his next time when he started learning, so then he davened. As opposed to Rabbi Shimon Yochai would daven once a year. So this itself is indicative of different levels in Terosim Nosoi. So based on the fact that there's different levels of Terosim Nosoi, so there's also the Amal Sicha that's according to that, like we said, the Rashbi's Terosim Nosoi is so great, the Mezritcher Maggid said, so his Amal Sicha, his davening had to be way unique and special to accompany that type of learning. But this was all in continuation and to bring out how every Yid has to have the idea of all the three Amos. And we brought that even Reb Shimon Yochai, he also had Amal Sicha. So he says in line 19, Amnam, Af shetel kolach misrol tzrichim lias kol shloisha sayin yon damal malacha mal sicha mal toidom. Though by every yid has to be all three matters: the toil of the work, meaning the avodah sabirurim, the avodah of mitzvahs, the toil of speech, which means davening, the toil of toidom. Mikol makom still in all, yesh chiluk mahu iker avodah. There's still a difference and a distinction. Mahu iker avodah. What is his primary avodah? Which of the three is what his main focus is on? Similar to what the Alter Rebbe explains in the Geras HaKodesh Siman Hey. In the general difference between Talmid Chachamim, who are Torah masters, versus the masters of good deeds, meaning those that are sitting and learning all day, and therefore they do not have the opportunity to, let's say, do a Gemil's Chesed, to give a loan to people, etc., versus those that are involved, let's say, in business all day. They have, let's say, more opportunities to give tzedakah, more opportunities to help people, and other mitzvahs, and so on. Both by the Talmid Chachamim and those that are involved in business, they have to have both things. Meaning, both by Yisachar, who represents the avodah of Torah study, as we know that Yisachar was sitting studying Torah, and Zvulun was supporting him through business. So even the people that are at the level of Yisachar, they also have to have the mitzvahs that Zvulun also has more of an opportunity to. Also by Zvulun has to be the idea of Yisachar mitzvahs that the mitzvah of learning Torah. He also has set aside time for Torah learning and so on. The difference is, what is his primary service? What is his primary avodas Hashem? And Talmid Chachamim Torah is what's primary for them. That's the idea of Rabbi Shimon Yochai. That is, Torah is his profession, and therefore Torah study was what was primary of all the three Amals, the Amal Torah, and Amal Bloch, and Amal Sicha. Still in all we see, is Asik Rabbi Shimon Yochai Gam Binyan Shom Ma'aser Poyol. Rabbi Shimon Yochai was also involved in actions, in things to benefit others, etc. Like we find, immediately when he left the cave after hiding in there for many years, is Asik Rabbi Shimon Yochai Binyan Shal Tikkun Ha'olam. Rabbi Shimon Yochai was involved with matters repairing the world. He came out and he asked, is there something that needs to be dealt with over here? Is there something that we need to have assistance with? Va'ad letikun inyanim hakshurim in shol kuzat meyes legamrim shalamata mitzedrish talshlos. To such a degree, he wasn't just dealing with the world of klibas noiga, he was dealing with the world that has to do with shol kuzat meyes, that the totally Talmudic klippas are totally beneath the whole entire Seder Shtalshlus. She'asa kama pu'ulas kedei l'tayim makom she'begeder sofik. He did many different activities to be able to purify a place that was no way of a doubt, that the people around him said there's this field that Kahanim have to go around, they can't cross because there was a grave lost over there, and he did different types of things to be able to see and determine what parts of the field they could cross. You could look at it in the side in the commentary if you want to read about it. To be able to the Kohanim should be able to pass through this field. He'd be able to use this shortcut. Va'adlam super b'Gemara Medrash Matil, but related in the Gemara Medrashim Shakasher Haitzrichim l'Shlech Shliach L'Umas Olam L'Reim Mishayish Shletzes Ba'Olam, when they had to send a representative from the Jewish people to stop a certain decree, and they sent the Rashbi to Rome because Rome was a superpower at the time. They were ruling over the world, and someone had to be sent to speak to them. And Rabbi Shimon Yochai was amongst those messengers. And he demonstrated over their miracles. So this is an amazing thing if you think about it. You'd think after 13 years in the cave, he would be an ascetic, as they say in English. Completely removed from this world. He wouldn't be engaging with the world. Adrab, as soon as he came out, he wanted to find out what he could do with the world, what he could repair in the world. And the same thing, he was even sent not just to help by dealing with a field, with Tumah, he had to go speak to Goyim to be able to save Yid. His Amal Malacha, his dealing with the world, his Ma'aser V'Poyel was a result of and connected with and subservient to his toil in Torah, because his main profession was Torah, but he only had, in addition to his Torah, he had also the Amal Malacha as well.